There are actually tons of reports and statistics on internet about that. It is true that diverse teams deliver. And it is also important to address the inclusivity as well. Being diverse doesn't mean being inclusive. Creating an inclusive environment means giving everyone the opportunity to actually showcase their opinions, feeling safe, and everything is actually connected. Everything goes back to being safe and psychologically comfortable, sharing ideas. There's another level to it because people coming from different backgrounds have different perspective into things, but also coming from different expertise have different perspective into things.
Welcome to another episode of the Product Weekend podcast. I'm your host, Joao Moita, and today we're exploring the dynamics of fostering psychological safety and navigating transformation in organizations. This is the latest episode of our third season, and we're joined by an inspiring guest, Esra Yetis. Esra is a seasoned digital technology consultant with vast experience in leading large-scale transformation projects. She's also a strong advocate for psychological safety and diversity, empowering teams to embrace change and build trust. In this episode, we'll dive into how organizations can create environments where teams feel safe, supported, and ready to innovate, even in the face of ongoing transformation. Whether you're a leader looking to drive change or someone focused on improving team dynamics, you'll gain valuable insights from today's conversation. Before we dive in, don't forget to follow our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps us grow and bring you the best content. Thank you for tuning in today, and let's get started. Hello, Esra. Welcome to the Product Weekend podcast. It's great having you here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and by the way, for the most attentive listeners, you'll see that Ezra is recording in a already famous podcast studio where we recorded the conversation with Chris. And let's start with something a bit more personal before diving into these product topics. What's a recent weekend that you really enjoyed?
I had an incredibly busy year every weekend and every month back to back. I was either socializing here in London or away for conferences or for other occasions. But last weekend, I just decided to stay at home, do nothing, just spend the weekend with my partner. It was just fantastic. I realized I needed this. I'm grateful for the lifestyle that I have and all the opportunities that I have and also created for myself. Burnout is real. So it is nice to actually just not do anything, chill,
Yeah,
Netflix, cook at home, and have a nice
that's
glass of
nice.
wine with partner. So it was very nice. Did you have a weekend like that recently?
Yeah, it's been a very intense period. Actually, I just recently shared on LinkedIn about it as well. That with Product Weekend, we're having like a lot of events, sprint
Mhm.
until mid November, and also planning for next year. So it's been very intense. I haven't had a full weekend of proper disconnecting and rest in a little bit, but I'm very much looking forward to some holidays, 3 weeks off very soon. So that's what's energizing me to push
Yeah,
through this final sprint.
very well deserved holiday for you.
Yes. No, I think it's a balance. It's important to pay attention to it. And yeah, as you said, burnout is real, and we always, as like high achievers, especially people in product, very often fall into that category. It's very easy to just think about work all the time and work ourselves to death. But it's really important to find time to disconnect a bit, to recharge. So yeah, glad that you had a recharging weekend this
Thank you. Thank
last
you.
weekend. Then let's dive a little bit more into the topic of today's conversation. We want to dive into psychological safety and how we can build that environment in teams. And I wanted to start with a bit of your background and your experience. You have a rich background in digital technology in different industries, also in different positions. So, could you share a little bit about what has been your journey like, with a particular emphasis on how your perception of the importance of psychological safety evolved through those
Yeah.
experiences?
I can see that my perspective changed since I started working closer with the business stakeholders, users, like leading cross-functional teams, especially in multicultural work environments. It changed my perspective because I learned that it's not only about me, it's also about being aware of the others and others' opinions and differences in others. It's not just about coming up with the best idea, it's about building on each other's ideas and working as a team, learning to actually work with others. And also, it's not about being the hero, being the best. It's about doing the best as a team, doing the best for the team and for the company and for your product. Since I actually started working in this type of environment, my perspective evolved. And I started working since I was 18. Not everyone knows that. And I don't actually talk about this publicly that often. And I started working in digital agencies, creative agencies, as a user interface designer. This is like way before user experience became a term in the industry. And of course, the environment there is different because everything, all the requirements are almost clear, but comes from a brand manager or account manager. You are not actually talking to your clients as much. And of course, I would do my own research and trying to use internet for that. But it's a completely different environment. And I had a very clear expectation from my role and how it should be like. And I could see myself what I could be doing like in 10 years. So that it changed a lot when I actually started doing consultancy. That was a different world. That was completely different
Can you
than
actually share a little bit about that first experience, how you got into it? And also, did you have any formal training in that space, or was it learning on the job? Can you share a little bit more about that?
one for me because is like my work experience, my study and training was a little bit different as well. So I learned everything what we call in the kitchen by actually doing. And because I started at a young age and I also had the responsibility of producing like lots of work for the agency. So I learned very quickly actually on the job. After working for agencies for 9 years, I was already like senior at that point, and I actually decided to study at university. I was probably already like 26, 27 around that time. And I joined university exams, and there was just one university that I wanted to go, and I just won. I don't know how it happened, but yeah, I was very happy. But then I got an offer from the consultancy firm that I worked at for 6.5 years, ThoughtWorks, because I was actually looking to do different things, more meaningful work. And I was even thinking of doing some voluntary job outside the country. And yeah, the managing director at the time, we just were having a chat, and I didn't know much about the company. And so that started the interview process. I guess I was at the right mindset and ready for the role without even knowing it. So that's how I actually was interviewed for the role and started in Istanbul office in Turkey. And actually, much later, I did my master's in digital management from Piper Island. I was already working in clients. I was living in Manchester. My client was in Germany. My study was in London. I was already a lead consultant at that point, but I felt like I needed to complete what I started, and I did masters in digital management. So it wasn't like a very classic journey of studying, going to university, doing internship. Mine is just the other way around.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. I think it's also very inspirational for people that you don't need to have these fancy degrees from fancy universities to find your way into tech. Every path is a different one, and you
Yeah,
can create your own with as long as you have the drive and you know where you're
yeah.
going.
It's not easy, but yeah, it is possible.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So then you started at ThoughtWorks. It was still in Istanbul, or you were
Yes,
already
I
in
worked
the UK?
for a year, and then I moved to Manchester,
Okay,
and then I moved to London and
right. So
ended up staying in the UK.
yeah. So at ThoughtWorks, I imagine you work with large scale organizations with complex problems, and you were supporting the teams, like mostly cross functional teams, I
Yeah.
assume. So, what were some of the challenges or common challenges that you've seen affect the psychological safety of teams across these different contexts that you were in?
Yeah, a majority of my clients were going through these transformation projects, and I'm now realizing more that the transformation will never end. We will always have to evolve and transform our business. And these type of large-scale transformational projects in large organizations usually have a few goals in mind, and they are very important. It could be to change the technology, ways of working, or transform the business, or transforming the entire organization. So what tend to happens is, in this case, leadership actually buys that idea and decide to invest in that transformation because of those goals that they have in mind. Maybe they want to actually change the direction that they are going. Maybe they want to be IPO, they need to change the technology, or they want to invest in their people and change the ways of working. However, even though the leadership actually has that vision, sometimes the people on the ground don't believe in it and they don't want to change it. Or maybe they don't see the reason why they should be doing things differently now. Because imagine people working in the same organization for years and years. And maybe an external consultant or maybe the business leadership from higher up coming in saying, now we need to change things now. So that creates a problem for sometimes for people on the ground because they don't see the reason, because they were not part of that discussion or the process, because they were not in the same journey. So it can be threatening for some people, but some people feel excited about this idea and they want to involve as soon as possible. In my opinion and observation, my experience, organizations are really good at this vision. They can see how the end goal might look like, but they don't have a really good plan to what happens after,
Mhm.
how the operation will evolve. Will people actually want to drive that change? Because you need those people to drive that change. It's not just going to happen. Even with external consultants, do you have the resource in place, and do you have a change management plan? I feel like that is the place that organizations lack the most. Actually, there is a model which is called the lipid Noster model. That model is great because it literally takes you from vision to success, and all the criteria that you need to have in place. That starts from actually having consensus from the people, building the skills, and also resources have in place, and have a clear action plan to drive that change. Therefore, that transformation can be successful.
Mhm.
And psychological safety has a major part in it because, as I mentioned, it's the people who will drive that change, not the vision. Vision is just a vision.
Yeah.
You need people to actually get there. Therefore, people should be feeling safe and not threatened by those
Mhm.
transformation and change. Therefore,
Yeah.
have to have a safe environment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. And you touched on some things. I also worked as a consultant for a brief period of time, but also had that experience of coming into an ongoing organization structure that there's already the team and you come in as this external force trying to change something. And that can be, some people, as you said, want to be part of this change and be involved. Some others feel it as a threat. What are some like tactics or practices that you like to do with teams when you come in as a consultant or as a leader to build the trust and to get people on board rather than having them feeling threatened by your presence? Do you have any specific things?
Oh, so many things actually I can talk about this, but I will try to actually summarize the few key things that leadership can do to help teams to onboard with these ideas. Once I mentioned the journey, right? There's a difference between being in the same journey, meaning your thoughts evolve. Now you share the same, like collectively have similar thoughts because you made an agreement. There was a discussion, there was a journey, there was time actually that you spent processing that information. Um, but teams didn't have that chance. Maybe let them actually explore their ways of working or how they want to approach this change. Therefore, you are actually making them a part of this change process, and also including them in the process where they can also make contribution to. it is like almost giving people a very restrict recipe and ask them to completely follow it, where they actually have the skills to make it maybe even better. Therefore, the leadership should have more like a guiding and supporting role than managing and directing and commanding role.
Or like
Yeah.
directing the vision, then prescripting like exactly what you have to do.
Yeah. And there's always this analogy that this has been used as well, like not being on the driver's seat, let actually people drive the car. So if you give actually people to anything that they can contribute, they will feel like they are part of this process. And I think the sense of ownership is super important. Giving teams the problem and then let them actually coming up with the solution. Again, in transformation projects, there is a goal, but not everything has to be defined into like very little details. Again, let the teams take ownership of those areas. Therefore, they will actually get excited about producing something new. I think that would be a good tactic. Some specific tactics and practices that teams can do to improve the sense of belonging and trust could be definitely breaking the silos. There's actually a very good book called Teams of Teams that is from a General Stanley who used to be in the US Army. I actually don't want to give any examples from the war and army, but that book has been written in a very clear language that really explains very well the command between team. Sometimes even when we have teams, what we call teams, they are actually practicing under really clear commands. That means when you have a problem with the command and when life happens, when there's a problem with that connection, teams don't know what to do. Therefore, instead of having siloed rows, having command chains from actually top to bottom, have teams that can actually have their own empowerment, their own autonomy, and have more knowledge that they don't highly depend on some commands. And when that command is not in place, they can still continue to operate. And the next level of that is teams of teams, because the book also talks about this concept might be feasible when you have 10 people, but when you have 50 people or over that and thousands of people, this might get complex. Of course, we don't expect every person in the team to know everything and have all the knowledge, because it's impossible. But have that actually connection and communication, allow that communication to happen between teams. Therefore, you are actually not relying on those managers, commands, or leaders to be there to guide you and support you. Definitely check that out and also look at between command teams and teams of teams. I think this really fosters a collaboration between the team and also help people learn more about the company, more aware of what is happening around them. Therefore, the solution that they will bring will be more accurate as well. That also fosters the trust, because in an organization like that, when the communication happens between teams cross-functionally, there is not much lack of transparency. Everything is transparent because the information is not held from those teams and individuals. I think that's definitely for me the principle to follow.
Yeah, that's great. We can also link it in the show notes. And yeah,
Definitely.
that part of transparency, not hoarding information, sometimes that can happen, or sometimes just not sharing because of not even considering it as a possibility. I think it's really important to empower this. Do you have any like specific examples? So explicitly going away from the war examples to your
Yeah.
concrete past experiences. Do you have some specific times or situations where you led the team and you helped somehow create this sense of belonging, this shared ownership? Is there something that comes to mind that you'd like to share?
So in the teams that I work with, I always actually set the standards from the beginning and definitely invest in team building and bonding exercises, not just only at the beginning, but also throughout, and have very close feedback loop between people and within the team, and create a safe environment for people to share that.
Talking about the importance of feedback loops, let's take a quick pause to reinforce something important. If you're finding value in these episodes, we'd appreciate it if you could subscribe and leave a rating on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us continue refining the show and bringing you more conversations that matter to you and the community. Thanks for being part of the journey. Now let's dive back into learning how to foster trust and collaboration in teams through psychological safety.
One example that I can give, that exercises that I did for another team, from a client, the business analyst from the team actually approached me and said, we are in this situation. We started working 6 months ago, and they started working during pandemic. Actually, most of them never even met each other. Even though after 6 months, all the teams have these phases like norming, storming, they should be in the phase that they are actually highly performing, but they were still struggling with that. And they could actually see a bit of resistance and unsafe environment. So they approached me for help. And that was finally the time that we could go back to the offices. And I designed a full day of activities for them, but they didn't know what to expect. They were all at the end said it was very good and overwhelming. So what I did was I basically pressed the restart button. So we actually need to get to know each other as a team and how to work. And one thing that I really like doing is the team canvas, because the team canvas begins with values and principles. So as a team, you agree on the values, and by vocalizing that, by agreeing on that together, this is pretty much like a contract between you and the other team members. So it's not just an assumption that, oh, we have these values. I talk about this sometimes. Therefore, my other teammate should also have the same values. So by starting with the principles, it sets the tone. And you also start with exercises such as what are the activities that we need to do. But what I like about that team canvas the most is it talks about the skills of all the individuals, but also some of their weaknesses and areas that they want to learn. I don't think every team really takes time to understand each individual skill set. They just assume based on the job titles.
Yeah.
Even pronouns are assumed based on what I think how you look like. Therefore, these kind of things, when it's printed in a team canvas, it's almost like a manifestation of your own understanding of your team members, and they get the time and also chance to explain themselves. The other part is that what it's called weakness could be renamed a bit differently, but let's say the needs of each team members. One said, I get serious headaches in the afternoons. Or one said, I have kids and they go crazy around this time. So one person said, I cannot handle meetings that are longer than 1 hour. So we are all different and we live in a different environment. It was really amazing for everyone to see and differences. And also sharing these types of vulnerabilities create a bond with team members. So I really like to start with that. And we did other activities that team members have to know things about each other and draw each other's portraits. Therefore, they take the time to look at each other's face and also some appreciations as well. So that was a full-on, very intense day. They didn't want to actually finish. We could go on for hours.
Nice.
So I'm glad that they found it.
That's super cool. Yeah, it connects to a lot of things that we've been also supporting teams with. One thing we usually recommend is having this manual of me, which connects to a lot of the things you were saying, like a one page or something like this, where you write your strengths, what do you bring to the table, but also your needs and your specific situations. When do you work best? How do you prefer to communicate? These kind of things, so that it's not assumed, as you mentioned. That's one big problem, that people just assume things and act based on those assumptions without validating the assumptions. And yeah, those kind of dynamics are really powerful. Actually, we don't need to get into a lot of details there. We talked about it also in a previous episode with Joy on the how much of the personal side you should bring to these kind of exercises, how much to open up. Like, some people don't feel as comfortable, and it can also create this resistance from some team members when they see that they need to open up their personal things, they just want to be professional and do their work. Like, and also it connects to a lot of cultural environments. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that, since you've also worked in different cultural environments and also coming from a different country to a new country, having to work with people from many different cultural backgrounds? What's your take on that? Do you think it's important to bring a bit of the personal side to work? How much? Is there a limit to that? How do you think about that?
Yeah, how much is very tricky. If you are talking about group of people or a culture in an organization where personality isn't a thing at all and you don't talk about your life because your life is business, that's one thing and that can change. And on the other hand, it should be also up to individuals to decide how much they want to share about
Yeah.
themselves. There's, I think, a beauty about sharing things about each other's, not each other, yourself
Mm-hmm.
to the other team member. That means you are feeling safe enough to share.
Right.
And to me, what is safe could stay within a team. And I think it's important for teams to agree on that from the beginning. This is a safe space. What we share stays here. It's only up to that person to actually share that openly in other places. That's what I mean by creating a safe environment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean I told you about my life and then you can go and talk about this in the rest of the organization, or you can assume that just because I share that with you, I'm comfortable sharing with the rest of the organization. There was actually one time that I was in leadership training and it was a safe environment, that we had small groups that we actually shared things about our lives. But at the end, we had to do a presentation about our leadership style. And I did the presentation and I was actually thinking that group in mind, like I'm talking to that group and sharing so much about my life in front of everyone and some leaderships from the previous company. I
Mm-hmm.
felt incredibly vulnerable and I didn't feel great because I wasn't ready for that. I didn't have the connection with other people. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why it is really important to understand what we mean by safe environment. And safe
Yes.
environment can be a closed group. And again, we are not allowed to share what the other person shared. We should be more practicing our active listening skills. And
Mm.
when the other person is happy and ready to reflect, we can then help them reflect. That's the
Right.
only job we should be doing
Yeah.
because that's a skill that we can help build. We don't born with these skills. We can actually learn it, and it is
Yeah.
life changing. Not only in the workplace, it's also life changing in the in personal life as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Definitely, active listening and reflection.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think it's something that you need to build. I also believe that sharing a little bit, and especially when you're coming in as a leader, you having this vulnerability, leading by example, will also create the space for other people to also feel vulnerable and to open up. But it's like a step by step, little by little, and with time you start building this environment. If you go like with that kind of workshop that you mentioned, but if you go like shock therapy, that you need to share everything and open up, it may have the opposite effect, that people
Yeah,
may be like, oh, now they want to get my personal information or something like this, and they don't feel comfortable and they retract even more. So
yeah.
it's also important to keep in mind that balance and that sensitivity to these nuances of how people feel about sharing and opening up. As we're starting to go towards the end of our conversation, there's also a topic I'd like to talk a little bit with you, which is about diversity in tech. It's something I know you're very passionate about and that you talk about a lot. So to start with, for let's say the like more skeptical minds, can you share any example, or how does it manifest that diverse teams outperform less diverse teams when it comes to like problem solving and innovation? Do you have some things to share in that regard?
There are actually tons of reports and statistics on internet about that. It is true that diverse teams deliver. And it is also important to address the inclusivity as well. Being diverse doesn't mean being inclusive. Creating an inclusive environment means giving everyone the opportunity to actually showcase their opinions, feeling safe, and everything is actually connected. Everything goes back to being safe and psychologically comfortable, sharing ideas. There's another level to it because people coming from different backgrounds have different perspective into things, but also coming from different expertise, have different perspective into things. When we are, for example, running a design thinking or design sprints, we don't have to have all the creatives in the room. We have to have people from different backgrounds and people from different expertise. Therefore, they can actually all bring a different perspective into the solution and help you see things that you cannot see. So that's the beauty of having diversity and inclusion, and why it has a direct relationship between creativity. And that's how they outperform. Otherwise, if you do this like a closed group that they all look similar, think similar, they might value diversity, but they are not diverse. They are not inclusive because they have this closed group. How likely they are to actually generate ideas that have this perspective, that the perspective
Yeah.
that they never ever had. So I do believe there is a strong connection between that. And also, the one thing that I really dislike that companies do a lot is using diversity as a marketing strategy. So diversity is not a marketing strategy, and your people are not your marketing material. I really hate when companies just shares the numbers that they have, shares the values and also principles, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they actually live within these principles and they actually believe, or everyone believes in it. Look at their leaderships. How do they look like?
Yeah.
Just because they have maybe women or people in from like minority groups or underrepresented groups in leadership roles, it's still not good enough. Let's have a look at what type of roles that they hold. Are they holding strategic roles? For example,
Yeah.
are they only in people management roles? It's really important to look at actually between the lines, just not the numbers, because
Yeah.
this is not a numbers game. It's more important than that. That means tokenizing people. You are hiring only to tokenize people. And it's more damaging than actually maybe not even being
Yeah.
diverse, because
Yeah.
you are just creating this illusion. And another thing that companies do that I really dislike is the questionnaires, diversity questionnaires, always starts with good intentions, but they can be incredibly biased as well. Let's take a look at my background, and I want to give my brother's background as well. So, if this was a questionnaire, now I gave a bit of about my background, right? I did my master's, and I am holding a leadership role in principal consultant. If you look at all these answers, I may not hit some of the diversity to goals that you might have. But would you know that I'm the first one to do the masters in my family, and also I did my masters while I was already working in over 30. So we really need to think about the numbers that we make up, and also the questionnaires. And my brother was the same. He did this actually national service, which is mandatory in Turkey, and then came back and studied university, which is way, way later than others. And then he became really successful, but he worked really hard to earn that position and being able to do it at a later age, not in an ordinary age to study. So I think diversity and inclusion is a really sensitive topic, and it really hurts my feelings when I see organizations says that they have the values and principle, but it's just a web
Yeah.
page with words on it.
Yeah. Like kind of greenwashing, like diversity washing. Not sure if that's a term, but
Absolutely.
it's probably something that happens quite a lot. And do you have some like specific tactics or practices? Like from what I hear, from what you're describing, it's more about the culture and actually giving real opportunities to real people rather than looking at numbers and having like quotas and having like fancy posts about how diverse you are. But if someone in a company notices that there's work to do here, what are some steps that they may take to improve diversity and inclusion in their teams? Do you have some, like, in which direction should they start looking for?
You actually mentioned the leaders being good examples to the rest of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredibly important because that's an indication, an idea to the rest of the organization on that company values and what they should be looking for example in their next reviews. I think how people's performance is measured really important in an organization because that says a lot about the culture. And let's talk about the leadership in specific, even the way they talk. If they change the way they talk based on a person's grade, they see that person's level differently. For example, there was one person that I worked with. We had a team member who was recently graduated. And the manager had very good intentions to make him feel included in the team. But he was keep making these jokes about, oh, you are a grad, you are the best grad. But if you keep saying grad to the grad, they will always stay in that bubble. And you don't make them feel like they actually are the member of the team like everyone else.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important when we are talking to people, let's not just assume, first of all, we touched on that a little bit, and also change the way you talk based on the person's grade. And there was actually a video I think I saw on LinkedIn or somewhere else, a high ranking pilot officer and the question by someone in the government, and the natural assumption about the pilot officer was she was a steward, even though she already told them what she does. She wasn't listened, and
Yeah.
then based on the gender or the appearance, she was assumed steward.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really important for leaders to set a good example and then see and respect everyone at the same level.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. This is definitely a very important topic, and we would need much more time to go in depth and to help people. But yeah, it's great that now people know you, so they can also find you and reach out to discuss these topics. Just to before we wrap up, I just have one final question for you. Who is someone that you look up to in leadership or in this space of psychological safety?
Yeah, there are tons of resources, books, and known people out there. I wanted to mention a couple of people I actually learned a lot from.
Mhm.
One is Amy Lynch, currently at ThoughtWorks, head of diversity,
Yeah.
equity, and inclusion. I learned a lot from her because I really didn't know a lot about diversity and inclusion until I met her. I have to say, she really changed a lot of people's understanding of the topic. And I joined many exercises that she ran before. And another person that I actually want to mention is the Tash Wilcox. She's a head of learning and design. I met her at Hyper Island. I really respected and admire her because she is a very authentic herself. She found the leadership style that she has and she is just embracing it. And she shares a lot of good materials and she has this incredible doodles that makes everything incredibly easy to understand. So I actually learned a lot from her in terms of leadership styles and also designing, service design, and also psychological safety as well. So I highly recommend checking her LinkedIn out as well and follow her.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Just to wrap up, Ezra, how can people find you? Is there any way that the audience can support you?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me from LinkedIn. I'm really easy to find. Don't hesitate to just message me, but just don't follow, connect so that I can follow you too.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Thank you so much for sharing, for joining us today. It was great catching up and going a bit more in depth on these topics. And yeah, for everyone listening, I hope this was useful. And we'll see you on the next one. Ezra, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting me.
And that wraps up our conversation with Esra Yetis. I hope you found our conversation about psychological safety, inclusivity, and transformation as inspiring as I did. Esra shared some powerful strategies on building trust and breaking silos that can make a real difference in any organization. Also, all the links mentioned will be available in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us so you never miss an update. And if you think someone in your network could benefit from these insights, feel free to share this episode with them. Your support helps us continue bringing you these valuable conversations. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's topic. You can connect with us on LinkedIn or just send us an email at team@theproductweekend.com. Until next time, keep fostering innovation and psychological safety in your teams.